It goes without saying that open world games have become one of the most popular genres on the PlayStation 4, and we've seen an abundance of open world games this generation. And in today's video, I want to take a look at 5 open world games that are super cheap that you should absolutely play. Some of these games are a little bit older, so if you picked up your PS4 mid-generation, they probably completely missed your eyes, and they're games you should definitely go back and check out. And best of all, again, these titles are super cheap, and I'll give you guys a rundown of what price you could expect to pay. So without further ado, let's get right into this. First up, we have Mad Max. Mad Max is an open world game developed by Avalanche Studios, and Avalanche Studios are very talented. They've worked on the Just Cause games as well, so you know they're familiar with their open world experiences. Unfortunately, Just Cause 3, another PlayStation 4 title, wasn't the best game in the world. Fundamentally, that game was actually pretty good. It was just a technical mess. What isn't a technical mess, however, is Mad Max. This game is technically brilliant. I do have to say there aren't any crazy explosions or any crazy environmental designs, as it is set in a desert, which is rather barren. But what you'll find in Mad Max is a pretty good story, a cool cast of characters, great combat, resemblant of something like Batman Arkham, and that's very high praise. Now, the one issue with Mad Max was actually from a promotional standpoint. It was released on September 1st, 2015, and while that date might not be relevant to a lot of you guys, that's actually the same day Metal Gear Solid 5 was released. And yeah, just going head to head with MGS5, I think I would call that promotional malpractice and promotional suicide, but I'm sure Avalanche didn't have any decision making as far as that was concerned. However, if you haven't checked out the game, I would highly recommend you to do so. And during a PSN sale, you can get Mad Max well under $10. Even on the physical side of things, I've seen it under $10. And it was even available as a PlayStation Plus freebie, so if you did manage to snag that while it was available, it's a game you should definitely dig out of your backlog and give a chance to.
And weapons in order to stand a chance against your enemies. As you progress, you will also need to upgrade your gear and abilities to survive against the brutal forces of the wasteland.
Griffer can help. Help you venture down to where you daren't go yourself. And lay bare your true promise.
While ammunition can be exceedingly scarce, there are plenty of other weapons at your disposal that can prove to be just as deadly. The wasteland is also filled with valuable scrap.
Now, moving on, a little while ago, I mentioned games being a little bit older. However, the next game is actually a relatively recent release that just unfortunately didn't do all too well commercially, and that is Agents of Mayhem. Agents of Mayhem was a game developed by Volition, the guys that also did the great Saints Row games, and Agents of Mayhem, while playing it, you can definitely see that shine through. It's a game that doesn't take itself all too seriously. You're not going to get super engrossed into the world. It's a little bit on the goofy side, but that's what we've come to expect. If you played Saints Row 3 or 4, you know how goofy those games are, and Agents of Mayhem definitely has its goofy elements as well, but it's a lot of fun. Again, it's a game you don't take all too seriously. You just start it up, have some fun in the open world, have some fun with the witty characters, and there's a lot of them that all play a little bit differently, and it's overall a pretty fun game. The hero swapping element does add another layer to the gameplay, and that's pretty cool. You typically don't see that in a lot of open world titles, and it's got some fun combat. And even being released less than a year ago, August of last year to be exact, you can readily find Agents of Mayhem for under $10.
They fired the copywriter who came up with that one.
Knock, knock, Legion. Let's start the show.
Yo, it's the Agents of Mayhem. We the hard way, that's a franchise. No, it doesn't got the Legion. Nobody fucks with the hard tech.
Next up, we have a personal favorite of the channel, and that is Sleeping Dogs, the Definitive Edition. Sleeping Dogs was an open world title released last generation in 2012, so it was released towards the end of the PlayStation 3's life. However, it was ported over to the PlayStation 4 in the form of Sleeping Dogs Definitive Edition, a much better version of the game technically and content-wise, because Sleeping Dogs, the Definitive Edition included all of the game's DLC, and there was a lot of it. So good to see it all available in one package. Now, Sleeping Dogs is a game that I feel like has become a cult classic. A lot of you guys do do know about it, but in my opinion, not enough people have played this awesome game. What it is, a lot of gamers will say it's something like Grand Theft Auto in Hong Kong, and I don't think that does the game justice. Yes, on the surface, it looks a little bit like Grand Theft Auto, but the open world is a lot more contained than a game like GTA 5, and the hand-to-hand combat is a lot more robust than what you see in a Grand Theft Auto game. It's again resemblant of something like Batman Arkham, and it's very satisfying in that regard, and I wouldn't say that about Grand Theft Auto in terms of its hand-to-hand combat. The story is great, the main character is super engaging, and the setting and world design is so unique and so well done. And best of all, at this point, Sleeping Dogs Definitive Edition, when it's on sale on the PlayStation Store, it's around $4.50. It was available for that price just a couple of weeks ago, and when it's available again at that price, you can't go wrong with it. It's such a good game, so much content, such a great experience, and again, you're paying less than $5 for it on sale. That is wonderful. At this point, I don't know if we're ever going to see a Sleeping Dogs 2. That's something I still have my fingers crossed for. It's such a good game. There's a lot of potential in a follow-up title. Unfortunately, on release, you could tell that this was a game with a gigantic budget, and maybe from the commercial end of things, it just didn't deliver up to par. But maybe if enough gamers jump on board at some point, we could see a Sleeping Dogs 2. Hell, we're seeing a Beyond Good and Evil 2. Why can't we make a Sleeping Dogs 2 happen at some point?
Jackie, Ma, I'm in.
Find a way to make him trust you. We want the Red Poles, the lieutenants, all of them.
Do whatever it takes.
Our brotherhood pays our enemies with pain, suffering, and death. None suffers more than a traitor. We're cops.
You're a cop. I'm an undercover cop. The rules are different.
You've crossed the line, Wayne.
Next up, we have a game that many would classify as the first truly great game of this generation. I might disagree on that aspect, but nonetheless, it was a great game, and that's Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. Now, of course, we did see the release of Middle-earth: Shadow of War last year. That game saw quite a bit of controversy. However, it's become a better experience since then. They've actually removed all the microtransactions in that game, but if you want the cheaper experience, if you want to start off with the first game, Shadow of Mordor is a great entry point. This is another game that has super satisfying combat, and while the open world isn't absolutely massive, there's definitely a good bit of content to the game as well, and the Nemesis system was something introduced in it that was really well done. It's got some top tier boss battles, great visuals, engaging story with some great characters, and it'll get you ready for Shadow of War if you want to pick that up, and that game is available for rather cheap at this point as well. Not as cheap as the 2014 Shadow of Mordor, which I just looked at a used copy at GameStop, and it was available for just $7, and during a PSN sale you can get it for around $4.99, so that's definitely a great deal. Shadow of War is typically around $19.99 if you find a good deal on it, so not all too expensive for that game either, and I would say at this point Shadow of War is the better experience, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't play Shadow of Mordor because it's a great game in its own right.
And claim Mordor.
How do I do this?
Your power.
What do you know of the Black Hand?
It's not about rules. Come close if you want the Black Hand.
What would you know that all these other dead orcs didn't?
Come this way.
I do not trust him.
We're lucky to have you.
Don't be blinded by your emotions.
I'll have your guts.
Where are the servants of the Dark Lord?
Kill him!
And finally, we have a PlayStation 4 exclusive, one of the early PS4 exclusives in Infamous Second Son. Now, I've been a big fan of the Infamous games. I played Infamous 1 on launch day, I played Infamous 2 on launch day, I played Infamous Festival of Blood on launch day, and of course, you know I played Infamous Second Son on launch. And honestly speaking, of the main Infamous titles, I would say that Infamous Second Son is the worst, but that doesn't really say much. Infamous 1 and 2 were amazing games. Infamous Second Son is also a really good game. However, content-wise, it doesn't seem as engaging and gets a little bit repetitive, and I feel as far as the story goes, it's not as engaging as the first two Infamous titles, but Second Son is a pretty good game in its own right. Visually, it's an absolute stunning game, even to this day, and it's got PlayStation 4 Pro support now, so if you've got that console, it's gonna look even better. One thing Infamous Second Son does have opposed to the previous titles is the powers that you have. You have a wide variety of different powers available, and as an open world game, and as is the case with the past Infamous titles, there's a lot to do in the game. The Platinum Trophy is gonna take you a little bit to get, and overall I would still say it's a game very much worth playing. Now, as far as pricing of Infamous Second Son goes, it's rather cheap. If you go for the physical route, it is a little bit more expensive. I just looked at a copy for $14.99, but I've seen it on sale on the PlayStation Store for around $7.99, so that is a great deal. There is also a standalone expansion to Infamous Second Son and Infamous First Light. That's pretty good as well, a prequel to the game, follows a different character. I would suggest you to start out with Infamous Second Son, and if you enjoy it down the line, you can pick up First Light, which is pretty cheap these days as well. That's download only, so bear that in mind. And again, Infamous Second Son was one of the early PlayStation 4 exclusives released all the way back in early 2014, so at this point it is a game many of you have forgotten about, but if you haven't checked it out, I would highly recommend you to do so, especially for the cheap price that it's available for.
Now look, for all we know, we may be able to pass you through their security, because you're not a normal viral terrorist. Seem to be getting the hang of your new symptoms, right?
Of course, the only downside being that, nope, can't think of anything. This is pretty freaking awesome.
That is going to conclude this video. Let us know your thoughts. This may continue to be a series where I take a look at some very cheap games across a multitude of genres. There are more open world games definitely available that are super cheap. I thought these would be 5 quality titles to mention for the first episode, but down the line we might do another series, and again we might go over different genres, whether it be shooters, RPGs. If you guys have any requests, of course leave them in the comments section down below and sound off with all of your overall thoughts in the comments as well. Thank you for watching and goodbye.